The Upanishads is a watershed in the evolution of consciousness. Instead of being ethnocentric and dividing all global history between BC and AD, we should really divide it between before Upanishads and after Upanishads, because the sophisticated psychology of consciousness in the Upanishads represents a quantum leap forward in human development.
In today's episode, we are going to be discussing the Upanishads. We are joined by Siddhartha G. Krishna, who we've had on Vichaar Manthan before, but if you don't know, I can let you know a little bit about his unique life and the perspectives that he brings. He was raised in a family tradition of yoga. He memorized the Gita at the age of 6 and was educated at the Kailash Ashram Brahma Vidyapith in Rishikesh. Hopefully we can come there one day, Siddhartha Ji. I mean, it must be an amazing place.
It will be lovely to have you here. It's a beautiful place, yes.
Excellent. So Siddhartha Ji is a spiritual master, teacher of Indian philosophy, including Advaita Vedanta, Patanjali's yoga, Sanskrit, and continues to be based at the Omkara Nandana Ashram in Rishikesh, which Vichaar Manthan is going to come and meet one day. And maybe for our listeners at home, can they come to this ashram? Can they come and stay in Rishikesh? How does that work?
Yes. Recently, Kavit was here, and we spent a whole day together meditating till late at night, and where I live deep in the forest.
Very nice.
So it was lovely to have him here because he went to Kedarnath, and on his way back, he was here.
So Kavit is a young gentleman that we both know. So Kavit, I'll be reaching out to you. You need to let me know what this ashram is like and what it's like to sit and stay with Siddhartha Ji and take in his knowledge. But thanks to the powers of technology, we're here live recording a podcast, and we will etch this forevermore into the cloud and data memory store for people to listen to in eons to come. I wonder if we'll have podcasts in the future. Will they remain a thing, or, for sure. So Siddhartha Ji, we're talking today about the Upanishads. I've certainly heard of them. I know there's something like 108, or there's 10 main ones, and they kind of, but they're not just texts. Are they books? I mean, we'll be uncovering all of this today. So let's start at the beginning. What are the Upanishads?
Thanks for having me for this podcast. It's always a pleasure to be part of Vichaar Manthan, whether it is part of creating a podcast or live discussions, which we have, extremely informative.
Can I just dive in on that for a second? Because it's a very good point and people don't often understand. So Vichaar Manthan, Vichar means ideas or thoughts or intellectual, right? And then the Manthan is the churning of those ideas. It's bringing those ideas and concepts together and seeing if they stand true to the test of sort of time and the laws of nature. So Vichaar Manthan is the churning of these thoughts and ideas. And I think that's the bit that you said you are pleased to be a part of. Why is that the case? Why is the churning of ideas so important?
It makes them, it refines them, and sometimes by being part of these discussions and dialogues, we see our own limitations. I see our own limitations. I notice some things that I didn't know before. I learn new things, quite a few new things whenever I'm part of these discussions. And most importantly, by vichara, by discussing things, concepts, they really become clear. In fact, one of the Upanishads, one of my very, very favorite Upanishads, from which this famous saying comes, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that this whole earth is like a family, which in the context of that Upanishad is a post-enlightenment declaration by the sage of that Upanishad. In the same Upanishad, the master says that there are four doors to acquire freedom from ignorance. The first door is meditation, finding inner peace. If someone finds this difficult, then the second door is vichara. Vichara, which means what we discussed, thinking, critical analysis. Even if that is difficult, then the third door to enter the realm of complete freedom from ignorance is contentment. And even if that seems difficult, then the fourth door is to be in the company of wise individuals. And the master continues to say, he says that even if you just focus on one, you don't need to open all four doors to enter the chamber. Just focus on one door that you think is the best for yourself. And then through that door you can enter the chamber.
What an amazingly well structured and thought out and easy to follow plan. Right? I think that's the way you've described it. 4 ways to help you sort of grow bigger, better, get over your own ignorance and achieve some type of freedom or happiness, I think we're alluding to.
And I think that's really the goal, the final goal of the Upanishads is always to overcome ignorance. They were deeply fascinated by light, and for them the eradication of darkness. Again, the famous mantra, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, O Lord, lead me from darkness into light. This mantra again is from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, from one of the Upanishads. And the Lord being addressed here is in that context of that Upanishad is no one other than Prana, which is the main deity of the Upanishadic masters. The Upanishadic masters don't speak of any other deity except Prana, this life force that moves within our body. They meditate on that, they pray to that, they worship that, they try to understand it, they try to follow it to explore deeper and reach the level of consciousness, and then they discuss consciousness. But this is the external deity that they focus on. All their practices are focused around this one deity, Prana.
That's so interesting. And I think, the way you describe that is so great. I mean, I think we're at the end of the podcast, right? You explained everything there is to know. I'm sure there's more, but that's so interesting. You think of other texts and books maybe centered around a particular Bhagwan or deity or power, so to speak. And here you're saying that Upanishads are the main force, the main... I don't want to use the word God. God's wrong, right?
God won't be the correct word. I mean, it's prana. It's the life force. It's the omnipresent life force. Yeah.
Quite a sort of self-intellectual topic, then.
Yes.
But how? When I say that, I think I refer to I, the ego.
Yes,
right,
but we have to be extremely careful. So because the part of the entire analysis is to differentiate between what we understand as I versus when the Upanishadic masters use the word I. Our I is the I in which I versus everyone else.
Right.
So it's a very exclusive I.
My unique identity. I am Sumit Sharma.
Exactly.
No one else is me.
Exactly. And the Upanishadic I is an all-embracing I. That I embraces all in itself. So this is a fundamental difference.
And when you say all, you're referring to all of creation, all of matter, all life force within itself?
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
So it's prana, the life force, the omnipresent life force.
And that's not material things. It's not distinguishable at a material level, like my body, that tree, the grass, even the air. No, it's deeper and beyond that. It's life force itself, prana.
Yes,
Prana Shakti?
Yes, prana Shakti. Sometimes, yes, the word Shakti is also used, yes.
Can we just elaborate on this a bit further? Life force. Like, could you decorate that in any more detail?
Yeah. So in its very material sense, it is certainly related by the masters to three things: to wind, heat, and water. All the three combined together, they give, in the understanding of the Upanishadic masters, they give rise to this force within all beings, which makes them living beings, which makes them alive.
Is that to say we are made of the elements? Like everything comes from wind?
Yes, that's the Upanishadic position again, that for example, one of the Upanishads says that from that ultimate consciousness arises space, from space arises wind, from wind then arises heat, from heat then arises water, and from water, after water, then ultimately arises matter, which is earth. So these five elements, the production, and then all living beings are produced from that. So so the Upanishads, they speak a lot about the five elements, but so that's one aspect of prana, which is the tangible aspect, because when we meditate on our breath, that is the tangible aspect. But then this is again seen as a vehicle of consciousness. So ultimately, prana is like like the statue in the temple or the picture in your home shrine points towards something else. Ultimately, this breath, which is the object of meditation, is seen as a symbol. So it's meditated upon as a symbol of a higher principle, which is the principle that experiences it, which is the principle of consciousness. So that's the ultimate. So they use prana as a deity, as an object of meditation to explore consciousness.
Wow.
So it becomes like it's like a symbol. Every religion makes use of symbols, but we generally, in religions, we have external symbols. In this case, this itself has been used as what they call sometimes also the sutra-atman, the threading breath, the breath that threads all of us together. It's a beautiful concept. I like this concept from the Upanishads very much, that like in a rosary, all the different beads, they have been thread together by a thread. So similarly, this breath threads all of us together. It is that connecting entity which connects all of us, because ultimately we are swimming in this ocean of how should I call it? Ocean of breath.
That's sounds so powerful, so deep. And we're talking in a lot of detail now about some of the content. But can we just rewind a little bit?
Yes, we have to. This was just sort of, I took a leap.
No, it's awesome. It's awesome. And you're clearly passionate about these. I mean, so we're talking about these texts, these sayings. What are they? Are they books? Have they been written down? Help me understand that.
Yeah, I mean, it depends really what you mean by texts. As far as I know, they were written down quite late, maybe just 1,000 to 1,200 years ago, not before that. For quite a few centuries, they were transmitted absolutely orally, because the core, the 10 principal Upanishads, not others, but the 10 principal Upanishads are absolutely part of the Vedic literature.
Right.
So you can find them. They have been picked out of the big of the greater Vedic literature. They have been in the same way like Bhagavad Gita has been picked out from the Mahabharata.
Right.
So in the same way, the Upanishads have been picked out from the Vedic literature, at least the 10 principal Upanishads on which Shankaracharya composed his commentary. So most likely before Shankaracharya, at the time of Shankaracharya, it seems like they were in quite a dilapidated condition.
And this knowledge, these texts, these learnings have transcended through time. And you mentioned there in an oral tradition, which was
yes, absolutely, as an oral tradition. Yes.
And that was the most appropriate tradition or method in which to communicate them. Can we talk about why? Why is orally transmitting great wisdom, lectures, understandings, text throughout time better than, say, written down or another method? Like, why is orally?
I guess back in extreme antiquity, that was the only method. At the time when these Upanishads committing them to memory was the easiest. And then such elaborate systems such as came into existence to commit these texts to memory, that they could be kept authentically in memory. On the other hand, if you allow them to be written down, then scribes can change, and add.
But text can be lost or pillaged and burned. So, oh my God, this is so interesting, the part. And I've never been able to really communicate this well. But what you're saying is the way that the method, the system in which we can orally recite and encode this information, this language, this text, this wisdom.
Yes.
By design, keeps the authenticity and integrity of the knowledge.
Yes. Yes.
I don't know. Is that explainable? How does that happen? Why is that the case?
It happens particularly because of the way they are recited, and it revolves around a system of reciting the ancient Vedas, which has been practiced over thousands of years as the Vedas, as the Vedic knowledge was transmitted orally. So in the Ghanapatha style, what happens is that each and every syllable is repeated 13 times back and forth.
Right.
So we would recite like, if I give each syllable a number, usually the recitation goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Like
it's almost poetic, or
it's absolutely meter. I mean, the Vedas are poetic, but what happens in the Ghanapatha style is that they will recite the syllables differently. So it will be like 1, 2, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1, then again 1, 2, 3, then again 2, 3, 3, 2, 2, 3, 4. So gradually,
and it's a proper system, like, and it works. And if you were to say it incorrectly, it wouldn't sound right, let alone right.
Exactly.
Deeply layered.
And then So, for example, the simple mantra, the first mantra of Ishavasya Upanishad, the first Upanishad, would sound like this. Om Ishavasyamidam sarvam yatkincha jagatyam jagat tena tyaktena bhunjitha ma gridha kasya svidhanam. So this would be the simple recitation.
Sure.
Now you have to bear with me to listen to Ghanapatha. It becomes a little bit long. Isha vasyam vasyami shesha vasyamidamidam vasyami shesha vasyamidam vasyamidamidam vasyam vasyamidagung sarvamidam vasyam vasyamidagung sarvam Idagung sarvagung sarvamidagung midagung sarvam yadyat sarvamidagung sarvam yat sarvam yadyat sarvagung sarvam yat king yat sarvagung sarvam yat kim kim yadyat kincha yadyat kincha cha king cha jagatyam cha king cha jagatyam cha jagatyam cha jagatyam jagatyam cha jagatyam jagatyam jagat jagaditi jagat. So I have only just recited half of the mantra.
And what perfection that was. It sounds powerful.
Yeah, in this, there is simply no scope because the mathematical structure of the mantra becomes like this, that there is no scope of removing one syllable or adding one. You just cannot change it. Otherwise, you mess up the whole mantra.
Perfect. That's so well put.
And so this was how they practiced. And this is then how they could preserve the original mantra because of this. And I just recited half of it, not the whole. So
and I suppose this is a bit that's interesting, philosophical, helpful for people, is the understanding of what's being said. And so surely that's quite difficult for someone.
Again, see, we had quite distinct traditions. For example, I am not trained in reciting the mantras. I have not taken formal recitation in that. My training has been completely on the meaning aspect.
Okay.
But what I see many times, some of the great South Indian Pandits, such as the Chelekar brothers, they have amazing recitation pattern. They recite beautifully, and they really do it. They have been trained since childhood to recite all of this completely from memory.
Wow.
They, on the other hand, may not be so much interested in the meaning. For them, it's more the sound. There are two traditions. Both traditions are there.
And that sound is arguably equally important to the vibrational frequency at which your body is operating everything. Let's not get into that. Let's get into the meaning, which I think is interesting. And
yes, that's what interests me the most, because it tells us so much about ourselves. Upanishads are really the source of yoga. Upanishads created the land, the ground, which could give birth to great thinkers and masters such as the Buddha and many other great masters that came after him, whether it was Shankaracharya, whether it was Ramanujacharya, all the great masters, because particularly this land between Gandhara, which is approximately the Indus Swat Valley in the western part of India, up to, this is the geographical location that we find in the Upanishads, from Gandhara. Some people say that Gandhara is the same like Kandahar now in Afghanistan, but most likely it's the Swat Valley, which is now present-day Pakistan. From there to the Indo-Gangetic plain, Bihar, Patna, Mithila, where Mother Sita was born. This entire North India, Punjab, Uttar Pradesh, this was the area, and it was this area which produced then later on also great thinkers like the Buddha, Mahavira. So Upanishads are more, some of the Upanishads at least for sure are more ancient than the Buddha.
And what a legacy you've just described there. A ground, a place in which some of the greatest thinkers of our time have come from. The richest, deepest, most philosophical texts have been produced from this area, this land. And you described as far out as Afghanistan, like the Indic civilization was a lot larger than what we know as today's India, right? Modern India. It's a vast, this is just land of
75 years old, 80 years old.
For sure. Okay, and so you're going into details here of what we're talking about. So why are there 10 main ones? What are the topics? What are they trying to uncover? What groundwork has been laid out?
Okay, so the 10 principal ones are the ones that are actually found in the Brahmana or Aranyaka texts of the Vedas, which is the extremely ancient part of the ancient Sanskrit literature. And so if they are actually found in those texts, and these 10 principal Upanishads, they were chosen to become the 10 principal Upanishads for two reasons. First of all, they have been discussed in very ancient texts like Brahma Sutra by Maharshi Vedavyasa, which is again this great seminal work, like the Bhagavad Gita. Brahma Sutra is also one of the seminal works. And Shankaracharya in the 8th century wrote commentaries on all these 10 Upanishads, and only on these, because they were the most ancient ones. So that is the reason. As far as the topic is concerned, Ishavasya Upanishad, all of, just very briefly, I would say that each and every Upanishad out of these 10 Upanishads explores ultimately consciousness in its pure nature and how to experience it. So yoga plays a very important role. Yoga has been for the first time defined in the Upanishads. Yoga has been mentioned very clearly in the Upanishads. And so these two things, experiencing the pure state of one's being, and then the path to experience it. Everything basically revolves around this.
If you would like to help us to invest in ideas that matter, then why don't you become a well-wisher? Sign up for our monthly donations via our website, which is vichaarmanthan.org. Become a well-wisher, support our work, and invest in ideas that matter. Thank you for listening.
Okay, so we're talking about these sort of 10 main ones. What topics are they all covering? What are they about? How does one go about trying to understand the Upanishads and these main 10 Upanishads?
So as I said, that each one of them revolves around exploring consciousness. That's what they call Atman or Brahman, the ultimate supreme principle, and methods of how to directly experience it. That is the core idea that we find in the Upanishads. But of course, there are very detailed discussions around so many different topics. But this is really, I would say, the heart of the Upanishads is always about it's always exploring Atman or Brahman, which is the self, as Atman is consciousness within the body, and Brahman is consciousness all around, present in this universe.
Is that sometimes referred to as super consciousness? And
yes, in English we can use that word. It depends really what we mean by it, but
as anything really, you know, we start to get into the semantics of language, because
exactly.
It's important though. It's not just, oh, it doesn't translate well. Some of these Sanskrit and Vedic principles and these words and texts cannot be translated into English, because I would say English is not dense enough to describe what's going on there. So can we try and break down Atman a little bit further?
Yeah. So the word Atman, if we would break it down, it can be explained in different ways grammatically, but let's focus on one. Yachasya santato bhavaha, which means something that is continuously present. which is continuously present. So when we look into ourselves, we have this stream of thoughts which constantly change, feelings change, emotions change, pictures, memories that come up, they constantly change. But there is this light which illuminates these feelings, the light of consciousness, without which, so the content, you could say that the content keeps on changing. The contents of our thoughts keep on changing, but there is something that doesn't change. It is the light. In the same way, like if you are watching a movie through with the help of a projector, pictures keep on changing. So the content keeps on changing, but the source of light remains the same.
Do you think people refer to that as their internal voice, like the way they think, that internal chatter or that constant dialogue of day-to-day activities in life?
Again, I would say that that's part of the mind. That is the changing part of the mind. That is because the chatter constantly changes. The words that we say internally, they constantly change. But the question is, does the one to whom those words come, does the one that experiences those words, does that entity change? That's the question that the Upanishadic masters ask.
Interesting. And one of my questions I wrote down was to ask you, are the Upanishads relevant today? But what we're talking about here makes them eternal, because it's not like it's, and I refer to them as text, but I think we've been through the nuance of how they're not just text, but the teachings, although were written or commentated upon hundreds, thousands of years ago, what they are commentating on is the lived experience, is how a human, through their consciousness, both internally and externally to the physical body, that consciousness, and again, consciousness is not the right word, but at some level of detail, we're talking about it here, how that is used, what it does, how it views mental chatter, the world, its life experience as it grows. Am I right? Does that make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. In fact, the teachings of the Upanishads have inspired several modern neuroscientists. So I was recently going through this very interesting book, Waking, Dreaming, and Being by Ivan Thompson, after listening to his talk at the Google headquarters.
Cool.
And he was brought up by a father. His father's name was Irving Thompson, William Irving Thompson, who was again quite a well-known author. And I'll just quote what his father says about the Upanishads, which he quotes in these books, that I'll just read it. The Upanishads is a watershed in the evolution of consciousness. Instead of being ethnocentric and dividing all global history between BC and AD, we should really divide it between before Upanishads and after Upanishads, BU and AU, because the sophisticated psychology of consciousness in the Upanishads represents a quantum leap forward in human development. So these are his words, William Irving Thompson, about the Upanishads. And he quotes this in his book, Waking, Dreaming, and Being, which I thought I must share.
That is amazing to hear. You know, I wonder if a world like that will ever exist. Before Upanishads, after Upanishads, and the way you described it, quintessentially, what did you say? A quantum leap for mankind.
A quantum leap forward in human development.
Human development has come from the Upanishads, these ancient Sanskrit Vedic texts. Is that right?
Yes.
Sanskrit Vedic?
Yes, absolutely. Sanskrit. They are in Sanskrit language, and they are Vedic texts. They are part of the Vedas.
Wow, what a deep, rich tapestry of knowledge, wisdom, and information that spawns from what we refer to as Sanatana Dharma, and in inverted commas, the Hindu religion, as people refer to it these days. But we're talking here quite deeply, quite philosophically about the lived experience, the human.
About the lived experience. That's a very important part. Yes, that it was their lived experience. Yes.
And so that gives me some satisfaction, I guess, to know I'm not just a mindless entity of chemicals wandering about things all the time. Introspection is within my nature. And here we're saying this ancient history of Sanatana Dharma, of Hindu Dharma, has methodologies to help you go through those experiences better, but not just better, but thoroughly understand the way in which you, I, us, it, we, I don't know, experience life itself or understand life force itself.
Yeah. I think this is really the first attempt to explore oneself, to go deeper into oneself, to unlock the mysteries of the mind and the biggest question of consciousness, which I think still remains a mystery. It was a mystery for them. It remains a mystery for us.
And we're not necessarily trying to get the answer. Rather, we're trying to go through the experience of trying to understand, because that's where the unlocking of, I don't know, what, life experience or understanding?
Life experience, yes.
Do you gain a serenity almost from this understanding? And I think those 4 doors is what helps me understand it. So meditate upon the splendor. And if you can't do that, have intellectual discussions about these topics, about the consciousness, about the lived human experience.
Yes.
And if that doesn't work, then
practice contentment.
Practice
santosha.
And there's, again, you're telling me that there's methodologies and practices in which to help you do that. And if that doesn't work, then stay around wise people, learned,
who have done this, who have practiced the other 3. If you find it difficult yourself to practice, then at least be with them who are practicing it. That may inspire you.
Do you think we've lightly covered all 4 on this podcast? Like, you chanted a mantra, right? So, you know, the meditative aspect. Maybe we should meditate upon that. We're discussing the ideas, a bit of vichar in there. I'm content. I think I'm quite happy learning, and actually, honestly, learning the detail of this from you here today does actually give me contentment within myself, that the lineage, the heritage that I belong to, that my ancestors come from, not just clever, but fundamental, the way you described it, fundamental to the way the human has evolved philosophically in intelligentsia, has come from my ancestors. That does give me contentment. And the last one was stay around learned, wise people. So here I am, very grateful to be talking to you, Siddhartha V. Krishna from Rishikesh live, helping us on Vichaar Manthan discuss these ideas and let our audience know in such great detail. So again, I am ever grateful for you allowing us to share in this knowledge. It's great stuff. We spoke at some detail about the 10 main sort of Upanishads that come from deep history of, is that from the Rig Veda that come from?
They come from all the 4 Vedas.
All Vedas.
Yes, so different Upanishads come from different Vedas.
Fine. So there were the 10 main ones, and then sort of there are 108 in total, but some recent translations that you're saying there are some more.
Yes.
Why so many, and what are the differences? And are there do you have like a favorite few Upanishads?
So first of all, we have these 10 classical, the 10 classical Upanishads on which all the great masters that came in India, they commented upon. They are extremely ancient. And then as time went by, the need of explaining many different ideas arose, and then several Upanishads were added. I think the unique thing about all these Upanishads is that they give a deeper spiritual explanation to every idea that arose in India. So, for example, there are Upanishads on Rama, there are Upanishads on Krishna, but unlike Ramayana, which will tell you the story of Rama's life, what we will find in the Upanishads on Rama is the deeper explanation of what Rama as a divinity symbolizes. Or, for example, the Upanishads on Krishna, the whole story of Krishna Leela as found in the Bhagavatam. What do the different characters stand for? So, for example, if you look at Krishna Upanishad, then Vasudeva, the father of Krishna, stands for oneness, for non-duality. Devaki, the mother of Krishna, stands for the wisdom that is present in Om. The 16,000 gopis have been explained as the 16,000 Vaidika mantras. The demons that Krishna destroys, they have been described as symbolizing greed, anger, hatred, and like this, or pride, arrogance. So different demons. So each and every demon that we usually in Bhagavad Katha, when we listen to Bhagavad Katha, that Krishna is part of Krishna Leela, he killed several demons. The Upanishads will go into detailed explanations as to what these demons stand for. So the Upanishads always explain, these are the later Upanishads, that you will find explanations of very famous mythological stories, but spiritual explanations that we as an individual can relate with. Then Krishna Leela, which means a Krishna story, is not a story that happened 5,500 years ago, but it becomes something that is taking place right now within me as I'm trying to become a better human being. And then Krishna becomes an essence which helps me in evolving myself, in getting rid of my negativities, of my unwholesome parts, unwholesome thoughts. So this is what the later Upanishads do. But if you look at the ancient Upanishads, they set the stage for this. And so, for example, one of the smallest Upanishads, which just has 12 verses.
So if ever anyone thought, how relevant is Hinduism or Hindu Dharma or my Bhagwan or my God, Lord, Krishna, whatever terms you want to use. And, you know, on the podcast here, we've been through the semantics of why language is important. But still, I am saying, if you are listening to this podcast and think, how is Lord Ram or Ram Bhagwan or Krishna or any of these deities relevant today? They are just mythical stories, creatures, beings that happened maybe thousands of years ago. If you think that, then rewind to the last few moments of this podcast where Siddhartha ji explains how those characters, those avatars, help you in your experience by recognizing them as the essence, as the story, as the learning, as the teaching, as the wisdom through which these spiritual experiences have been described and taught and shared in the Upanishads. Is that a wholesome, fair representation of?
Absolutely.
Great to hear.
For example, one of the smallest Upanishads, the smallest Upanishad, which just has 12 verses in it. It's a very concise but very in-depth explanation of what Om stands for.
Wow.
What Ma, and how they are to be used as symbols to meditate upon what is being symbolized by them, which is consciousness in its different states. consciousness in the waking state, consciousness in the dreaming state, and consciousness in deep sleep, which is a great mystery. And that comes to the forefront as the Upanishad develops its understanding of consciousness in deep sleep, where we seemingly appear unconscious, but the fact that we remember that I was deeply asleep, I didn't see any dream. So what was that entity which experienced the absence of everything, the absence? All of us remember when we wake up in the morning, we say, oh, I slept so well. My sleep was so deep that I did not even dream. So what was that entity which experienced the absence of any thought, the absence of any dream? So all of this is explored in the context of Om.
That, you know, I go through some crazy simulations in my head when you talk like that about the human experience. And it's not just the waking up till the going to sleep human experience. We're not just 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., whatever time you wake up and go to sleep. I know my times are a lot later than that. It's not just the awoken state. It's, you're talking about sort of subconscious, unconscious. Those are all experiences within the human psyche that the average you and I, maybe not you and I, the average me, all of us.
Yes, absolutely.
Experience all of it 24/7, 365 for the entire duration of our life. There's a record being generated and we can't remember some of it, but it's being experienced. And you're talking about here, the Upanishads, the shortest one at least, helps us get into the detail to understand that experience also. Wow, mind blown. This is great.
Yeah. So that would be one. Ultimately, the Upanishads are so vast. In Kailas Ashram, by studying just Upanishads every day for 1 hour, it took around 6 to 7 years to study all of them with the commentaries of with the commentary of Shankaracharya and the sub-commentary of Anandagiri.
So that's a long time, and
that's a long time.
I'm sure a lot of people would find it difficult to commit to something like that. So
that is why Gita came into existence, because Gita is seen as really the Upanishads are seen as a cow, and Gita is seen really as the milk of the Upanishads, as the very essence of the Upanishads.
If you don't have, I guess, time to dedicate to the Upanishads, then the Bhagavad Gita is a great summary for you. So go back and listen to that episode if you do want to know more about Bhagavad Gita, but essentially pick it up and read it. It will help you. But I am very interested in what you've said about the Upanishads. I'd like to read more. Where could one start?
There are several translations today available. My favorite one is, of course, the one by Dr. S. Radhakrishnan. Dr. S. Radhakrishnan, who was the second president of India and a great philosopher of modern India. His translation is my favorite one. But if someone wants to start with reading something very simple, easy to understand, and in which the author has in fact selected the easiest sections of the Upanishads, then I think the translation of Ekanatha Iswaran would be the best as a starting point.
Sure, and I'll be sure to share the links in the description below for all our listeners. So, Siddhartha-ji, this has been a fascinating conversation, as always, that I have with you about various topics. You know, we've covered the sort of Hindu library, we've talked about the Bhagavad Gita, today here about the Upanishads. I'm sure we'll do this again on some deeper texts, and maybe our listeners at home can help us. Let us know what you want to hear, what you want to talk about. Siddhartha-ji, any parting thoughts or pearls of wisdom one could take away from the Upanishads? Like, I think we've talked about them in detail, but if you had to summarize, why are they important, why they are relevant today, why someone should know what they are? Do you have something to add?
The most beautiful thing about the Upanishadic wisdom is that it helps us, ultimately, quintessentially, what it helps us to realize that we all on a very deep level are united. We all are one. And on that level of realization, I would just have to ask the question that the Upanishadic master asks, Tato na vijugupsati. How can such a person hate anyone? How can such a person dislike anyone? And this is why this post-enlightenment exclamation that we find in the Upanishads, that Ayam Nijaha, this group belongs to me, Paroveti, and that group does not belong to me. This is the consideration of those who have not yet worked on expanding their hearts. Udara Charitanantu, those who have expanded their heart. For them, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, for them, the entire earth is like a family. This is the message that the Upanishads give. It is from Mahopanishad. And I think ultimately the entire practice, the entire understanding leads us surely to this state of experience in which the heart has expanded to such an extent that the entire earth, which includes not only human beings, but all living beings, are seen as one single family. So this is the message that resonates immensely with me.
Very beautifully put, Vasudeva Kutumbakam. I am not going to attempt to summarize that in any way, shape or form. This has been a riveting conversation. I've certainly learned a lot, and I hope our listeners too at home have taken something away from Siddhartha Ji Krishna here today, live on Vichaar Manthan from Rishikesh. Thank you very much for gracing the mic again, Siddhartha Ji.
Namaste. Thank you very much for having me. It was such a pleasure.
And to all our listeners, thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. If you think someone could do by listening to this, please send them a link. We are always interested to hear more, to share more, and discuss ideas that matter. Vichaar Manthan. My name is Sumit Sharma. This was the Vichaar Manthan Podcast. Namaste.